lend me your ears. That's just to make sure you're awake. Good. The point is this, you see, that sometimes it has been said that the talks and lectures are just a sort of gap between the junketings of the night before and the junketings that are to come. So those of you who have come here for rest, the chairs in the lounge are much more comfortable. Some are born great. Some achieve greatness. Some open their big mouths and land themselves right in it, and I'm in the latter category. The reason why I'm here is because last year I happened to have a few words with Graham and said that I'd been to the conference for quite a number of years, never actually presented anything. So
never will again.
Yes. So this was to be my spring song and my swan song. Actually, I told him a fib because my wife did a little bit of spring cleaning, somewhat delayed because it was only done a month ago. I couldn't do anything about it. But those of you who attended the conference in Chester in 1993 will remember all too well that there was one here, A.W. Landmann, who gave a lecture on how to dry your leather without shedding tears. Now, I can't remember this. And if any of you do, perhaps you'd like to inform me what I said on that occasion, because I can't remember either. So, really, this is not quite the first and last time that I have appeared at the conference. Now, the thing is, of course, I've been retired for some years, and it's very difficult. I'm not sort of actually doing anything new, so I had to find something, you know, that wasn't new, but hopefully interesting. And so I thought, finishing has been my life, and I thought that we'd have a mini debate. Now, you know the Oxford Union, you have a motion, two people actually propose the motion, and then two people oppose the motion, and at the end of the performance, everybody has a vote to see whether the motion is actually accepted or rejected. Now, I'm having something different today because I'm having three motions and I'm the only speaker. Instead of questions at the end of a normal lecture, you are going to, in fact, add to what I have said in hopefully supporting one of the three motions. And then when all said and done, you have a voting slip and you can support that finishing is an art, that finishing is a craft. I must say that the craft there is not the craft I'm talking about, and that finishing is a science. And I'm expecting at the end of this, for each of you to come to a conclusion as to which of those motions you are going to support. I'm going to put the case for each one in turn, and I hope that I am completely unbiased. Some chance. Now, art. Finishing is an art. Now, I'm going to mess around with definitions, because first of all, what is finishing? Well, I want to separate the whole leather manufacturing processes into two. One is preparation, and the second one is finishing. By preparation, I mean that we are talking about all the preliminary stages where you get a usable something. And finishing is all the processes afterwards that actually make it acceptable and desirable for the customer. So in the first stage, you've got, in fact, the wet work, and in the finishing stage, you have dyeing, finishing, but also the mechanical processes that go to making leather what it is in the end. That is, you buffing, suading, glazing, all these sort of mechanical actions as well that help to give the leather its final character. Milling, staking is included in that. So you can see that there are only two stages of leather manufacture: the preparation and the finishing. Now, I think that we started off with leather being made and used for its utility. I think this is completing this.
You actually. You open your microphone, Axel.
Oh. You see, I'm not used to this modern technology. I'm expecting my voice, in fact, to carry without having any mechanical interferences. Well, this is, in fact, an early Ice Age shield. And you can see that even at that stage, it was decorated. The first shields, of course, were just raw material. They'd taken the hair off, and it was then perhaps even tanned. But then what they started to do is they moulded it. And as soon as they moulded it into a sort of usable shape of a shield, they started to decorate it. And that's the first finishing process. Now, at that time, it wasn't coloured. It was just decorated by, they pressed it into a wooden mould when it was damp, and then they heated it, a queer, brie, I think, process, where in fact it was subjected not to actually boiling, but certainly to a heat which partially degraded the finish, but it was still, in fact, to a certain extent flexible, but much harder and more useful. And then because they then sort of had little patterns in the wood, and as they pressed the skin into it, it accepted, in fact, and produced these patterns. And I think you can use your imagination that these would also be in use, probably burnished. And so the pattern of that they had on the shield was, in fact, there was a contrast of colour, maybe just darker brown. And that is, in fact, the very sort of earliest decoration and finishing process that I've been able to find. The second one is actually a Roman shield. Now here, for the first time, you actually see it coloured and decorated. Now I'm sure this probably wasn't a useful shield in a battle, but it was probably used for ceremonial use. And it's because of that it still remained in its state and still is coloured, because a lot of the early colorations of leather were in fact done with vegetable dyes which faded. And although we have existent Roman sandals, they are not coloured, not because they weren't coloured originally, but because the colours in the processes of time have faded. And so we don't know very much about that. It wasn't really until about the 17th century we get leather clothing with colours and embellishments. But the first instance of coloured clothing actually weren't in leather. At least the leather is not now extant, but it was in the decoration of vases, and it shows figures obviously dressed with coloured clothing, leather clothing, and it I think it's evidence for the fact that certainly at a very early stage coloured clothing was also in existence, but we have only this evidence on vases because ceramics withstand the ravages of time much better than the original leather which was used. So coloration is certainly an art form, Now, of course, it is very important these days that, in fact, leather finishing is still an art, and we have all sorts of examples. And I have got a book which you can look at afterwards. Dear, I think I should soon have to give this thing up. Here is an illustration from a Stahl studio in Holland, showing a fashion effect leather, and also an article which is a handbag. I don't know whether you actually recognize the handbag. There's a handle, and there's the actual bag, where they've used effectively that leather in making an actual article. And finishing is art. Finishing is the fashion. Finishing in its art form sells leather. And so, if you believe that finishing is an art, vote art, which is signified on your voting slip by a palette, artist palette. Now, I don't know whether you agree with or can understand my beautiful drawing, but there it is. In case you just can't read the word art, you'll see that if you can put your cross in the right part of the voting slip. Now, my second thing is the finishing is craft. Now, you can have all the fancy designs in the world, but it needs the craft element to transfer that idea, fashion idea, actually onto the leather. If it weren't for the foreman finisher, all the art design would be of no use. We would need, in fact, somebody to actually put that on the leather. Leather, too, is variable, as you're all aware, both within the skin or hide and between packs. And it is the craft element of finishing that enables the art and the science, which I shall talk about in a moment. It's the craft element in leather finishing that makes, in fact, the whole thing work. So if you think that craft is the most important part of finishing, vote craft. Then we come to science. Well, I've been sort of fortunate, I don't know, I have lived through a whole revolution of finishing, which has been due to science. When I first entered, I had my education in finishing at Northampton Tech, and then I went on to actually make finishes, develop finishes, test finishes at Langro, and so I had a sort of certain background in finishing. And then I was recruited by BMRA, and all that I learned, I then put into research on finishing. Now, when I started, casing reigned supreme. True, fast coating bottom had been developed by BASF in the 30s, and there were, of course, patent finishes which were rather unsatisfactory. There were cellulose finishes with cracked, perhaps not as bad as the patent, but not at all that much better. And resin finishes really were still a dream. But after the war, there came the use of butadienes, which were surplus to the rubber program. And we had vinyl acetates, which had to be plasticized, but enabled, in fact, resins to be used and produce finishes which had much better hold-up, covering power, and they were flexible. But then, of course, science marched on, and we had acrylates developed, where you could have virtually anything from very soft and tacky to hard and brittle, and all stages in between, and by suitable blending and copolymers, you were able to, for the first time, to sort of get finishes more or less as you wanted. But these polymers had a certain limited temperature range of application and use. At the soft end, they were too tacky, and at the hard end, they cracked. And there was a certain temperature range which was quite limited. And it was the introduction of polyurethane, where for the first time you could have softness without tackiness and hardness without brittleness. And so it was possible. And I think in the future we shall in fact see through the science the designer finish. You can have what you want. Flexibility, you can have abrasion resistance, you can have hold-up differences, because the scientists are able to make emulsions in different particle sizes, so that in fact if you've got a very absorbent leather, then you can in fact have the same polymer in a larger particle size, so it gives hold-up. And where in fact you want a bit of penetration for perhaps better adhesion, you can have smaller particle size. You already have, of course, impregnating finishes, which can go right through the grain structure and improve. All part of science which has been developed. And remember that by science I also include engineering, another of my little definitions. And you think of the developments that there have been in the application of finishes due to engineers. We have a wonderful range of atomization possibilities, spraying. You've got roller coaters, curtain coaters, and laminating processes whereby you can preform finishes and transport them to the leather, combine them with the leather. I'll keep my hand with that for my so the science offers us not only the present, but also the future. And so if you believe in that, both science. Now you've got a set of questions that are said. I'm sure I've missed something along the line. If you have anything to say in any of those three possibilities, say on.
Axel, what do we do if we think that a little bit of each is the
Well, I deliberately put a don't know. That is, I'm afraid I'm going to put you to it. You see. And we've arranged this talk just before tea, so that we can collect your votes and count them up, and I'll put up the answers after the tea interval.
Axel, in supporting what the last speaker has said, there's a bit of art and a bit of science and a bit of craft in finishing, of course, across the whole field. You've got the Italians with the art and the colours and styles. You've got glazing and the craft that the people do on the seats, the French and seats. So and then you've got the science, and as you say, the polyurethanes and making sure the application. What I was persuaded with in the end was what you said, having worked in the industry, about the foreman finisher. Because the foreman finisher, you have to train very well. He has to know some of the science, and he has to know some of the art. So if you force us to choose one, I'm going for the craft.
Good. That's just a...
Just in response to that one, Axel, he just voted for all three. and changed his mind at the last minute. which is not the way to do it. He just said one guy is pulling everything together. So he's used all three.
By the way, to stop multiple votes, each of these voting papers has a security mark on it.
RFID tag.
On the edges of the... No, that's your mind. There's a picture, you see, and on each edge there is in fact a little bit of that picture. So if I don't find that on the voting slip, I know that it's a fake.
Having said all that, Axel, I'm over here. Hey, you're looking around. The best finishes I've ever had seen working have all been artists initially, but that need the science bit to achieve the results which the customer wanted.
Yes, and this is the trouble, isn't it? You try and get three possibilities and they want all three.
But I finish it with Ken, the real finisher is a craftsman. As is the leather. I think actually a tanner is a craftsman as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm full of
today's
as an industry, aren't we
commercial quality and consistency,
Performance.
how and performance, what we rely on, everything. Science, I would say. Science to get
measured by science.
It's all three.
So you need the fingers to actually do it.
It's all three. What else? That's all three. From a health perspective, I think leave the finger out.
Ground unified theory.
Sorry?
What about the ground unified theory, where you've got the physicists and everybody else, the chemists, trying to equate Einstein's theory to gravity, etc., all of that. So you've got a ground unified, people trying to develop the unified theory between the particle physics, the microphysics, and ground, on a large scale. Could we not sort of go for a similar approach?
I'm not personally ever got anybody else who's prepared to nail their colours to the mast on this one.
I don't think
Where's the shoe for, right?
This is the trouble with talking off the cuff like I do. I mean, I've got it's all prepared somewhere or other, but I've forgotten one of the bits that I was going to mention, and that is inkjet printing, which I think is probably, it may well be the sort of end of science and the combination of science with art, because here you are able with inkjet printing to put all your artistic proclivities into a finished form. And
Axel, at the end of the day, you need a craftsman to put it all together. So again, you're putting all three things together.
made that.
I don't think we'll have a vote here, do we? But here you've got, in fact, the inkjet printing probably gives the artist and the fashion designer the greatest scope. This is actually a German magazine which shows some shoes decorated with pictures of the Beatles. At last year's conference, decorating the tables at the dinner were some examples of British inkjet printing. This happens to be on a bit of sole leather. And you've got all the supporters of the conference doing their advertising bit on a nicely cut out shoe. So there is going to be immense scope for art and science, and as you say, it needs the craftsman to put it all together. I'm arguing against myself. By the way, if you want, in fact, to see some of the artistic prognostications for the future, I've got some booklets, both of the leather effects and some of the design applications, which I hope you can look at.
It's advertising for the free drinks.
Have you been secretly working this down the last few years?
No, I'm sure that the other manufacturers have something similar, but I happened to go to the Northampton lecture when this was all demonstrated, and thinking already about what I was going to say, I thought, well, this provides me a bit of illustrative material which I couldn't possibly have produced myself.
Should we at this stage then push to the vote then, Axel, and
Yes.
And then adjourn for tea, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.